Good evening, friends. Welcome to the India Power Talk. As you know, India Power Talk is an initiative wherein we invite international thought leaders and domain experts to create an easily accessible digital reservoir of their insights, experiences, and strategies on the economy. This is meant to benefit not just Indian entrepreneurs and policymakers, but also international businesses, investors, and strategic partners who have invested in or intend to invest in India. We have been inviting entrepreneurs, economists, professors, investment bankers, inventors, scientists, lawyers, chartered accountants, and other senior professionals with experience in diverse sectors who could contribute on the subject. Before 1990, the country that was about 1% of global manufacturing value added today accounts for nearly 30%. A majority of global brands carry the Made in China labels and stamp. There are multiple reasons and enough statistics available that explains why China is the world's factory. China is unquestionably a manufacturing powerhouse. The two most debated questions the COVID-19 pandemic has raised are: who will win the race for making the successful vaccine,
and which country will be the next manufacturing hub?
For today's discussion, I'm going to focus on what made China the global manufacturing hub and what needs to be done by India to reach a competitive level in manufacturing. Most importantly, should India compete or collaborate? And to talk on this, we have today someone who has lived and taught in China for 13 long years. At the China Europe International Business School, CEIBS, which is ranked 5th in the world in the Financial Times Global MBA and EMBA ranking. Most importantly, between 80 and 90% of the participants he taught are Chinese executives from both the private and public sector, entrepreneurs and investors. He has also been in charge of the India module of CEIBS, one of the most popular electives at the school, through which he brings approximately 120 participants in India every year on 1-week immersion programs. The long stint in China has given him insights into some of the key drivers of the Chinese economic miracle. At CEIBS, he chairs the Strategy and Entrepreneurship Department, has previously chaired the Research Committee, and has been a member of the Faculty Evaluation Committee. He previously taught at IESE Business School in Spain. Let me welcome highly experienced and most distinguished Professor S. Ramakrishnan, Velamuri, from the China Europe International Business School, CEIBS. Last year when I visited China, 14th August 2019 to be precise, when I met and heard Professor Rama in our firm's annual conference. On arrival at the Shanghai airport, I saw hundreds of biometric devices for access control, and almost every common man was using mobile app for language translations. I could see technology being used across the board for each and every action there. Professor Rama, before we get into today's subject, you have spent 13 long years in China. May I request you to share China that you saw and experienced?
Thank you, first of all, Nitin, for that very kind and glowing introduction. It's my pleasure and honor to be invited to the India Power Talk. To answer your question, I have been an expat now for about 37 years in total. And I've lived for about close to 25 years in Western Europe, about 4 years in the US where I did my PhD. And as you mentioned, the last 13 years in China. So when I came to China in 2007, I was already quite an experienced, my family and I, we were quite experienced expats. And our stay in China for 13 years has been wonderful in every respect. At a personal level, as you know, China is like India. They have a great respect for teachers. So I have been very highly appreciated by my students and by anyone, any Chinese family or any Chinese man or woman who has come to know that I'm a teacher. And my kids have gone to school in Shanghai. They went to an international school. My wife has worked as a school teacher in an international school. And China and Shanghai in particular. Shanghai is, probably one of the most modern cities in China. It combines the infrastructure of a developed country and it offers some conveniences that are only available in an emerging economy. So when I say the infrastructure of a developed country, I mean, wonderful public transport systems, great healthcare, great educational institutions, wonderful leisure opportunities, whether it's gyms or tennis courts or other kinds of leisure, swimming pools, cuisine from all over the world, very multicultural environment. And when I say, conveniences of an emerging economy, when I lived in Western Europe and North America, we could never afford a full-time maid, but in Shanghai, we could afford that luxury, So as an expat, we were actually very, very comfortable. We have been very comfortable in China. Of course, my daughters are now grown up and they are studying in North America. But, both from a personal perspective and from a professional perspective, I can say that I have been very lucky to work for a very successful business school. We completed 25 years in 2019, and it's very rare for any academic institution to be ranked number 5 in the world after just 25 years. As you know, the competition from the US, Canada, Western Europe is quite formidable. But we have also benefited from being at the right place at the right time, because of the school has benefited from China's economic growth, and I have actually been part of that growth of the school and the recognition that it has achieved internationally. So to answer your question, the 13 years that we've had in China have been really wonderful.
Great. Do you have Indian students there?
Yes. So in our full-time MBA program, we admit between 10 and 15 Indian students. Because we are so highly ranked, I think we attract a large number of applications from India. And we get applications from the top institutions, the IITs, BITS, St. Stephen's College, and NITs, PITs, and so on. Yes.
That's very interesting. Thanks, Professor Rama. Now let's get to business straight. Forget the commentaries, statistics, data, and all technical explanations. Could you tell us your insights on China? What made them to rise so fast? The true ground reality. I mean, the truth of the matter.
The truth of the matter, I think, is very well known and simple. I think they started a program in the 80s, what's broadly referred to as the reform and opening up. They gradually recognized private enterprise. It was only about maybe a little more than 10 years ago that they recognized private property, property protection. There was a law passed for private property protection. But the reform and opening up basically meant that the country created pro-business policies, and created infrastructure at a very fast pace. So starting with the special economic zones, the building of roads, the building of ports, and this combined with a very large supply of cheap labor.
Mm-hmm.
It was also very disciplined and hardworking. We should not forget that. Very hardworking people. So this created the ingredients for China's economic success, I would say briefly, yes.
But would you attribute the success only to the infrastructure and the low-cost labor there?
I would say that those were very important building blocks. There were other building blocks, and here I would like to compare with India. So for example, even though in 1980, both China and India had similar levels of GDP, China, in my view, had 4 important advantages with respect to India. Okay. Mm-hmm. The first was that they had a more educated workforce. So they achieved very high levels of literacy, even when they were a very poor society. That's the first difference. So if you go back to 1980, the difference in literacy rates was close to about 25 percentage points. The second big advantage that China had was that they had a healthier population.
I see.
And a healthier population is more productive, just as a more educated population is more productive. So irrespective of which healthcare outcome you look at, whether it's life expectancy or infant mortality at birth or maternal mortality at birth, China was far ahead of India and continues to be far ahead of India.
Mm-hmm.
Even their healthcare infrastructure in terms of number of hospital beds per 100,000 people, they are far ahead of India, right? So that was the second advantage. The third advantage was that they were a more equal population in terms of gender equality. Chairman Mao famously said that women hold up half the world, half the sky, sorry. Women hold up half the sky. And you see the presence of women, in every aspect of the economy in China, okay? And they are actually, China has achieved greater gender equality than many of the richer countries in East Asia and Southeast Asia. Compared to South Korea or Japan, China has much greater gender equality. And the fourth advantage they had with respect to India, I think, is that China has very low levels of social stratification. What we mean by social stratification is that it is very easy for Chinese people to move up and down the socioeconomic ladder. Unlike in India, where we have barriers such as caste or religion or other kind, or even gender, right? Mm-hmm. In China, there is a belief amongst the people that if you educate yourself and if you work hard, you can progress upwards on the socioeconomic ladder. And when 1.3 billion people believe that, then you have 1.3 billion engines of growth. So I would say, my answer to your previous question was, very pro-business policies, reform and opening up, very pro-business policies, abundant supply of cheap labor, but also I think the human capital, in terms of education, in terms of healthcare, in terms of equality, they had some significant advantages with respect to India. And that's what enabled them to grow very fast over 30, 40 years.
Could you, slightly elaborate on the education policy over there or education system over there as compared to India?
So basically, in China, even during Chairman Mao's time, right, he unified the country in terms of a single language, which is Mandarin Chinese. So everybody in China speaks Mandarin Chinese, although there are many, many local dialects. Everybody speaks Mandarin Chinese. And he made sure that everybody could read and write. And in China, in order to be considered literate, you need to be able to read about 1,500 Chinese characters.
I see.
Okay, so the standard for being considered literate in China is actually quite high. And I can say, that in the 13 years that I've been there, I have actually never come across a Chinese person who has not been able to read or write. So that is very, very important. And then they also place, as a society, just like in India, especially in India with the middle classes, you see this quality, that they place a very great importance on education. So their school education system is very, very rigorous. So when I teach, for example, students from China, and there is a mix of students from other places in the world, in quantitative abilities, the Chinese are very strong, just like the Indian students. The Chinese are very strong in quantitative abilities. And they have made huge investments in upgrading their universities, the public universities, through different programs that they introduced. So billions of dollars were invested in upgrading the university system. And so, and this combined with the wide adoption of educational technologies, what we broadly refer to as EdTech, right? That has really given them a very, very strong advantage with respect to other countries in the world.
Great. Let's move to the technologies, because people have not spoken too much about the technological development of China. The speed of adoption in technologies in China has caught the world by surprise. From superpowers like Alibaba and Tencent to artificial intelligence and the development of 5G technology, it seems China is becoming known as an innovation powerhouse now. How has China been able to achieve this? I mean, the progress in the technological field.
I think there are multiple answers to that question. Okay, so I think in terms of adoption of technologies by the people, we see a similar phenomenon in China and India. So both countries have leapfrogged some generations of technology. So for example, both China and India have pretty much leapfrogged the fixed line telephone technologies, right? So we moved almost directly to mobile. So because China did not have a strong technological history and their youngsters were very educated, they eagerly adopted technologies. And I think if you look at the reform and opening up of China, starting in the early 1980s, right? The 80s coincided with the PC revolution.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
The 90s coincided with the mobile revolution. From 2000 to 2010, you can say broadly speaking, it was especially the second half, was the smartphone revolution. And from 2010 to 2020, it has been a convergence of digital technologies that have really, penetrated every aspect of the economy, right? Now, China actually has masterfully ridden these technology waves, okay? So China has very optimally adopted all the technologies that we spoke about. So so if one reason for the success of China, of course, is its economic policies, but they have been very, very proactive in adopting science and technology. Okay, in fact, Deng Xiaoping, the paramount leader of China after Mao Zedong passed away, he spoke about the 4 modernizations of China. And one of the modernizations was modernization in science and technology, right? So that's a very, very important building block. The second reason for you mentioned the creation of giants, technological giants such as Alibaba or Tencent or Meituan, is that China has created its own technological ecosystem in some sense, right? Which you don't see, for example, in India. Okay, so in China, the market leader for search is a Chinese company called Baidu. The market leader in social media
is parallel to Google.
Yes, which is parallel to Google. In China, the social media giant is Tencent, which is a combination of Facebook and WhatsApp. With the WeChat super app, they combine WhatsApp, Facebook, and PayPal or other payment apps, right? Then you have e-commerce giants such as Alibaba with Taobao, which is more of a C2C platform, Tmall, which is a B2C platform, and then you have another very big giant which is called JD.com, which follows more or less the Amazon model. So they have homegrown giants in each vertical, of technology. Is that so? So that if you look at that and think about the size of the Chinese market, right? So these companies have been able to grow to a very, very big size without really stepping out of China. So if you look at the operational footprint of Alibaba or Tencent or JD.com or even Meituan, you'll find that they're very strong in China, but they're not really strong outside China. The only pure technology company, and I'm not including the hardware companies here, I'll leave out the hardware companies, I'll talk about them later. But if you look at the pure tech company, the only tech company from China that has been able to create a global footprint is ByteDance, which is the parent company of TikTok. But the rest of the Chinese technology giants have really found it difficult to grow organically outside China. And that may have to do with the fact that they are functioning within a very, very, let's say, unique technological ecosystem that's not integrated with the technology ecosystem of the rest of the world. Okay, India has, you could say, one way of putting it is to say that India has adopted a different policy. I think the reality is probably that India did not really have a policy. technology policy. We just drifted into the situation where we are today. So we have all the multinational giants positioned in these big technology verticals, right? So you have Google, you have Facebook, you have Walmart and Amazon. E-commerce. Some people think that what China did is the right thing and India should have done the same thing. I'm not so sure. Okay, I think the jury is still out. One advantage that I think Indian tech companies have is that they are better integrated with the global technology ecosystem. And let's not forget that, whether it's Google or whether it's Facebook or whether it's, Amazon or whether it's Walmart, all these companies have very, very sizable back-end operations in India. So these companies actually have a very, very strong India presence in terms of development, in terms of maintenance, in terms of different kinds of services. So I would say that the second reason why China has been successful is that they've been able to create a kind of an ecosystem within the country, and that combined with the market size has allowed their companies to grow. I don't want to suggest that the market is not competitive, that the government has not protected these companies in any way, because competition in China is brutal. It's just that Baidu has not faced real competition from Google. Tencent has not faced real competition from Facebook and so on, right?
But why is that?
Because it's not easy. Facebook has not been allowed to operate in China.
I see.
As simple
So that's
as that.
that's the protection which the government offers to domestic companies.
But it's different in different verticals, right? So Google was operating in China when I was there, when I first went to China in 2007. But then the Chinese government requires technology companies to have their servers inside the country.
I see.
And Google was not willing to comply, and so they left the country. And Amazon actually, as far as Amazon was concerned, or eBay was concerned, there were actually no barriers for them to operate in China. I think they were just outwitted by more nimble local competitors. eBay was outwitted by Alibaba completely, right? And the same is true of Amazon. Amazon tried very hard to break into the Chinese market, but they were not successful. Yeah.
So one question I would like to ask here is how much you say the government was very proactive in protecting and also supporting the local companies. What is the role of, or how much has the government invested in technology compared to India?
It's very difficult to say, right? So just to give you an idea, since approximately 2008, in 2008, India had a higher rank than China in the global innovation index. I think we were roughly 28th in the world, and China was maybe 29th or 30th. I don't remember exactly, but India was slightly ahead of China in the GII rankings. In the rankings that were released this year, in 2020, China is ranked 14th in the world, and India is ranked 48th in the world. Okay, so not only has China sped past India in the innovation rankings, it has also sped past many developed Western countries. Okay, and the secret actually lies in what they did post 2008. After the global financial crisis, most developed countries cut back on R&D. Okay, whereas between 2008 and 2016, China almost tripled its R&D expenditures. So there is a measure which is called gross expenditures and research and development, which includes both public expenditures and private expenditures.
I see, both ways.
Yeah, so China actually tripled, almost tripled, right? Its GERD in those 8 years. India increased its expenditures by about 20% over those 8 years, but China tripled its expenditures, right? And so this is where, in the last 12 years, is where China has really caught up with the rest of the world in cutting edge areas such as artificial intelligence, big data, Internet of Things, blockchain, etc.
I'm still keen to know, Professor Rama, from you as to how much is the government spent on innovation. Whether it is education, judiciary, or their other departments, whatever public sector departments, infrastructure department. How much is how would you compare Chinese government investment in the society or in the technology as compared to India?
Yeah, I have the data. I can actually share it with you later, but I don't remember the exact figure now.
Sure.
But just to give you an idea, China's expenditures on R&D currently are about $600 billion. $600 billion.
The government expenditure.
No, total public and private. Okay, $600 billion, which is roughly 2.2% of their GDP.
I see.
Okay, the $600 billion is adjusted for PPP, purchasing power parity. Okay, India's expenditures are about $63 billion, about 1/10 of China's. Okay, we spend 0.6% of our GDP on R&D. China spends 2.2%. Okay, now given the fact that we spend so little, it's actually quite surprising that we are ranked 48th in the world. Because that's not a bad rank if you think about it, right? And we are probably the highest ranked country in the lower middle income category, right? In the lower middle income category, probably, or one of the highest ranked, right? I think maybe Vietnam and Ukraine may be higher ranked than us, but we are one of the highest ranked countries in the lower middle income category in the Global Innovation Index rankings, in spite of actually spending a very, very small amount on R&D.
I see. Okay, let's move on from technology to manufacturing. Professor Rama, why do you think India's manufacturing output is so small relative to the size of the Indian economy,
right,
and in compared to the service sector that India offers?
So just to share with you some data points, I mean, our population is about 18% of the global population, 1/8. Our GDP is about 7.75% of the global GDP. Our manufacturing output is about 3% of the global manufacturing output. So really, our manufacturing sector is very small relative to the size of the economy. I think there are multiple reasons for this. I think one reason is that at a very basic level, it's still very hard to do business in India. I have to give credit to the recent governments for having improved India's ranking in the ease of doing business of the World Bank. But on the ground, it's still not easy to do business in India, especially in the manufacturing sector. Okay, and I think the central government, I think, is generally very progressive when it comes to the manufacturing sector and the policies. But ultimately, it is the state governments that actually step in and interact with manufacturing industries on a regular basis. And I hear still, unfortunately, from many parts of the country, complaints about harassment, extortion, and so on and so forth. And just the complexity of the laws is still very great. One of the biggest problems in India continues to be land acquisition. I think availability of land is still not a smooth process, in spite of the good intentions of both the central government and the state government. It's not a smooth process yet. Power availability has been a problem, although it's been improving in the last few years. Our labor can be much more difficult to manage, than, for example, the labor in China. So these are all issues that we need to deal with, I think. And unless we deal with these issues, I'm afraid that we'll not make progress as a manufacturing economy.
Large part of Indian economy comprises of SME, MSMEs, and the startups of the world. We have the largest pool, I guess. they contribute not only in terms of the manufacturing output, but also in terms of generating large amount of employment for the country. What would your advice be to them? Or how would you compare the SME of China versus the SMEs of India?
I think generally speaking, one big difference between China and India is the scale, right? Many Chinese companies graduate out of the MSME classification. They go from small to medium-sized companies and from medium-sized to large companies. There is a very strong aspiration for growth in China, and with many Chinese entrepreneurs, I found that appetite is almost insatiable. They want to keep growing. They want to keep growing.
I see.
And the dream of every Chinese entrepreneur has been, until now, at least, that may change with the difficulties the China and the US are facing in their bilateral relationship. But the dream of every Chinese entrepreneur has been to list his or her company in the US, on New York Stock Exchange or on NASDAQ, right? I find that in India, many business people, even successful business people, once they reach 300, 400 crores or 4 billion rupees in revenues, they say that's good enough, and they shift their attention maybe to more community service or more spiritual pursuits, right? And I'm not saying that that's necessarily a bad thing. I'm just sharing this as a
no, you are absolutely right. Your observation is absolutely bang on point.
Yes. And so I think that growth, appetite, hunger, I see less of it in India. That's my first observation. The second thing I would say, and this is advice that I give to SMEs all over the world, and that is that if you want to grow and if you want to crack the growth ceiling, you need to do two things essentially, right? You need to first build a strong management team, right? With a strong management team, you will be able to delegate the day-to-day running of the business to your team members, and that will allow you to focus on the more medium to long-term strategic issues. Okay, and many founders of companies, even companies that have been successful, fall into the trap of not building management teams, and so they spend their entire day on extremely short-term issues like why has the delivery to this customer A been delayed by 1 day, right? And so that's not something that the CEO of a company should be worrying about, right? Of course, it's very important. It's very important to keep your customers satisfied, but you should have competent team members who are looking after that, right? And so that's the first thing. So build a strong management team. The second thing, which goes hand in hand with the first point I just made, is to rely more on systems and processes, right? Rather than ad hoc decision making, right? So you need systems to evaluate people. You need systems to measure the performance of your employees, of your team members. You need systems to determine who has outperformed and who has not, right? What kind of a bonus to give, team member A versus team member B. So very much systems and process driven. And if you want to, grow in the manufacturing industry, by definition, you have to be very process driven, right? So these are the two recommendations that I give to small and medium enterprises. These are things that sound simple, but they are not that easy to implement. And very often, SME founders, they associate delegation with loss of control.
Yes.
And they are unable to delegate effectively, I think, and that somehow constrains their growth.
No, you are absolutely perfectly right, Professor Rama. So last year, Indian Prime Minister and the Chinese President met at the Mamlapuram in Chennai, when many of the foreign policy experts said that both these nations should collaborate and not compete. I mean, what's your take on this, Professor Rama? Should we compete or should we?
I totally agree that we should collaborate, right? I think both countries are very fortunate to be neighbors. When you have two neighbors that are so large, of course, China currently is about 5 times as big as India in terms of nominal GDP, about 2.5 times the size of India in terms of PPP, adjusted GDP. But when you have two large economies as neighbors, there are many studies that show that neighbors trade more with each other than countries that are geographically distant from each other, right? But neighbors also have more conflicts with each other. That's also, there's also empirical evidence to support that. So as long as we can manage our differences, there is great potential in both countries collaborating. Mm-hmm. And I've written in the Chinese media actually that although both countries have made tremendous progress in bilateral trade from roughly 2 billion in the year 2000 to about 90 billion today, I believe that the potential is for both countries to achieve about 500 to 600 billion dollars in bilateral trade in the next 5 to 6 years, right? If there is trust between the two countries, and if the bilateral trade grows in a balanced way, right? One of the complaints of the Indian side has been that the trade has been very unbalanced, right? So India runs a huge trade deficit with respect to China. And I've actually written in the Chinese media saying that it's a problem for India and for China that the most competitive manufacturing sector in India, which is the pharmaceutical sector, has not enjoyed market access, right? The Chinese will respond and say that if there are any barriers to the pharmaceutical industry, they're not India specific. And they're right in saying that, they're absolutely right in saying that. But I think the Chinese side should probably work a little harder to make it possible for India to sell its pharmaceutical products in China, which will be very good for the bilateral trade of both countries, and also very good for the Chinese citizens who are craving for affordable medicines, right? Because one of the problems in China is that the cost of healthcare, just like in India, the cost of healthcare is very high. And so India can make an important contribution through its generics to bringing down the cost of healthcare in China. And I think there's a great potential for collaboration. Another area of collaboration, I think, is in IT services. India has, so China is a world leader in consumer tech. I think they are lagging significantly behind the United States when it comes to enterprise tech.
Oh, I see.
And this is where India can make a great contribution to China in helping China catch up with the US in enterprise tech, because we have 30 to 40 years of experience working with the largest enterprises in the world in helping them develop their technologies, right? And so there is another great opportunity for collaboration. In infrastructure, the Chinese can help India a lot.
Absolutely.
Both in terms of quality of infrastructure and cost, right? Whether it's railways, whether it's tunnels, whether it's roads, whether it's highways. And in the manufacturing sector in general, they've got so much experience. And one of the things that's happening in China is that the costs are going up. In coastal China today, labor is more expensive than in Malaysia, for example, right? So many Chinese companies, if we can create a hospitable environment for them to manufacture in India, they would love to come to India and produce in India, and then export from India to other markets. So I think great potential for collaboration, but I think we need to strengthen the trust between the two countries. And I hope, we can do that step by step.
Sure. Professor Rama, really thank you for all the really practical and the hard insights straight from China. Professor Rama, what would be your message to India?
To India, I would say, I think we should engage with China. I think it's very, very important because we can't change geography. And we have a 3,500 kilometer border that we share with China. And so decoupling with China is not an option for India. It may be an option for the US, which is several thousands of kilometers away from China. I don't think it's an option even for the US, but definitely not for India. And I think if we want to build an Asian century, the two countries will have to learn to work with each other. And on the ground, if you see, when I bring Chinese participants to India, they connect to India in very, very deep ways. They are very impressed by what they see in India. Similarly, when Indians go to China, that in Shanghai, there are several thousand Indian professionals working in China. They're so happy working there, right? And we all feel very appreciated by the Chinese people, by the way, So I think on a people-to-people level, there is tremendous chemistry. I just think that, I hope the leadership of the two countries can figure out a way to work with each other so that, the relationship with two countries can fully blossom.
Professor Rama, really thank you so much for your valuable time, insights, and experience. It has been a pleasure talking to you.
Thank you so much. My pleasure, Nitin.
I would like to also thank the Indian Chamber of Commerce, the Law Seco, and the India SME Accelerator Network. Let me conclude with my vote of thanks with the humble prayer to the Almighty to bestow mankind with the right spirit to fight the coronavirus and also help restore peace, prosperity, and bliss. Thank you, Professor Rama, once again.
Thank you so much.